I think we're ready to start.
Thank you, Angela. A personal request of mine, in case you're wondering.
That was pretty fantastic to start this off. Hello. Let's get this discussion going because I think we're probably all eager to see the outside and the beach, right? Hello, I'm Jewel Tomasula. I'm policy advisor for the Endangered Species Coalition, and I have the honor of being the Wildlife Work Group co-lead for this America the Beautiful for All coalition, and been part of planning this conference too. And it's been exciting time, exciting day, exciting movement. We've been hearing such great ideas, hearing such great stories today, and I'm excited for this panel to hear some specific community stories from ocean and coastal stewardship and some specific tools that we have to ensure that reaching 30 by 30, going beyond 30 by 30 is effective and equitable. So just stating that the America the Beautiful initiative sets an ambitious target, and it has done so much to catalyze the conservation movement, but we really do have work to do to ensure that this goal actually means biodiversity recovery, clean waters, and just social outcomes. So we will need goals that go beyond acres and percentages. It wouldn't be a success if our lands and our oceans lack the wildlife that we cherish and is sacred to so many cultures. It wouldn't be a success if our waters are polluted. It wouldn't be a success if people can't access these places, if they're closed out to them for subsistence and recreation. So this is why we're seeking to emphasize the who and the how of conservation as we think about this 30 by 30 goal. And in some metrics, already essentially reaching 30% protected in oceans or in certain states and some territories. It's like we're reaching that, but what does that really mean? So our panelists today are engaged in coastal and ocean conservation, and so I'm asking you to introduce yourselves. We'll just start with your introduction, your name, your organization, a little bit about what the organization, the community work you do, and then I'll come back to each of you with a question to prompt your story.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Usman Mahmood. I use he/him pronouns. I am from Houston, Texas, and I work at Bayou City Waterkeeper as the policy analyst. So just to introduce you to Bayou City Waterkeeper, we are a Houston-based nonprofit. We use law, science, policy, and community organizing tools to effectively fight for improved water quality in our region, for flood mitigation, wetlands protection, and overall clean water access to our communities. We serve the residents and ecosystems of the lower Galveston Bay watershed. Geographically, that encompasses about 12 to 13 counties of the Gulf Coast, Texas region. But it also, more importantly, comprises over 120,000 acres of wetlands. I think that can highlight the importance of our watershed and why conservation is becoming a growing important tool in our region.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Graham. I use she, her pronouns. I am the president and CEO of Minorities in Shark Sciences. Our mission is to create a space where we have equitable representation, and we really support people doing the work of shark research and conservation. And we do that in a number of ways: outreach and education, professional development and training, and our inclusive research as well. That's community-based and community-driven.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nilda Jimenez. I work for the Department of Natural and Environmental Resources in Puerto Rico. Within that agency, it's a state agency. I coordinate the Endangered Species Program. Within that program, my activities are it has a great range. It goes from corals and addressing invasive corals We support the work of coral nurseries. We conduct coral reef restoration. We address groundings. We also implement marine debris program with the removal of abandoned vessels. We work with brown pelicans, all kind of species, the Virgin Island boa, the Puerto Rican boa, the shark-fin hawk. So it's a terrestrial and marine, so it's quite diverse. I like my job. And we also struggle with other parts like the administrations, the laws, the regulations, seeking to conserve all of those endangered species. So, it goes from field work and implementing activities or actions to conserve and protect those species, but also trying to get the laws and regulations to support those activities for saving those species.
Dr. Nilda Jimenez. So it's important that Nilda is one of the people at the Department of Natural Resources that's an ally to many folks on the ground, so I just want to make sure that she also recognizes her position, because I know very humble, so I just want to make sure that that's recognized as well. Raimundo Espinosa, I'm the Director for Conservación Conciencia. We're a local environmental conservation organization based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Our work is to implement conservation actions in collaboration with frontline communities to really showcase how conservation actions can lead to sustainable development by including those communities that are on the front lines. So a lot of the work that we do can go from marine debris removals in partnership with the commercial fishing sector, where commercial fishing sector is where we invest in the commercial fishing sector to be the leaders in the primary removal of fishing gear. We also work with the fishing sector to move towards resiliency, fishing associations to install solar systems for them to be resilient and reach carbon neutral seafood production. Of course, this is in addition to needing additional power, just because in Puerto Rico we have an issue with our electrical grid, and hopefully you won't have to experience any of that while you're here. And so part of a lot of the work we do is really making sure that conservation, that the wins and the benefits of conservation reach communities during implementation, not just afterwards. We work a lot with the commercial fishing sector, and so we also make sure that the traditional knowledge that the commercial fishing sector has, that we're able to include them into ongoing proposals and projects that involve research, including endangered species, including information to restore and conserve coastal areas. And so one of these projects as well is to innovate the inclusion of aquaculture into traditional communities. And so we do this in Naguabo, at the Naguabo Aquaculture Center, where we're working to restore queen conch populations in partnership with commercial fishers. And of course, the queen conch is an endangered species. It's also one of the top two commercial species fished in the Caribbean, and specifically in Puerto Rico as the U.S. Caribbean, but throughout the entire region. So it's really making sure that conservation is intersectional because of how it impacts communities' economies, but also their cultural and social well-being. And so that's what we do. Thank you.
First and foremost, I just want to thank the Taino people for allowing us to be here and gather safely on their lands. Me'iha wenihinkam natwanya ne Jessica Calderon tongvet neha koya mixkanakan koyo eme. My name is Jessica Calderon. I am from the Tongva Nation, which is the first original peoples of Los Angeles. I am also Chumash, which are the neighbors to Los Angeles, and we are from Ventura all the way into Central California. And I am also Yaqui or Yoeme, which are the peoples from Arizona and Mexico. Take away that border. And I'm glad to be here with you all. I work for Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples. I am the Director of Land, Water, and Climate Justice. And there's so much that Sacred Places covers. They've been up and running since 2012. And basically, to put it in a nutshell, the goal is to uplift the indigenous voices and peoples and ensure that they have safe spaces, safe places. And when we speak of indigenous peoples, we also make sure that we include the land, the plants, the water, the sky peoples. We include everybody because we don't see ourselves as separate from nature. We see ourselves as a part of nature, and it would be foolish to separate ourselves from that. So in a nutshell, that's SPI.
Right, thank you all. So glad to be learning from you today. So starting with Guzman. So Bayou City Waterkeepers works toward the goal of swimmable rivers in this Houston area, and much of the goal requires protecting wetlands in the watershed. So could you tell us more about the role of the Clean Water Act as a tool in achieving these conservation goals?
Sure thing. So usually when there's a person with glasses and beard talking about the Clean Water Act, it's Julian Gonzalez from Earth Justice. So I'm happy to give him a break. The Clean Water Act is quite interesting, and it actually has been a very critical tool for our legal strategies. I guess just to give you some context so the Clean Water Act is actually the only law of the land that we can use for wetlands protection in Texas. There is a supposed state-based wetlands conservation program, but it is actually totally voluntary, so there's no regulation required on it. And I think the other sort of context here is that in the earlier fights we had, in terms of Section 404 in particular of the Clean Water Act, which regulates the discharge of dredge or fill material into waters of the United States, aka WOTUS. We actually, I think, had to kind of inconveniently fight the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, our local district, a couple of times, because what we found is that they were approving Section 404 permits without actually, required mitigation, or the permit authorizations were just poor. And so, we've had to sue them a couple of times to protect, any wetland parcels that they were going for, or that developers were going for. And then I think what happened with Sackett was very destructive for Texas, and it will be going forward. Since we have no state or local laws defending wetlands, and since that Sackett decision totally narrowed the federal jurisdiction of adjacent wetlands and how they need to have a continuous flow, that's an issue in Houston because of rapid development, urbanization that continues to have us lose wetlands at an unprecedented rate. Over time, they become isolated wetlands, and so they no longer have that continuous flow that they were required to have under Sackett. So they are immediately, within the 100-year floodplain under risk. And then I think the other important thing to note is that Texas comprises of over 95% of all land in Texas is privately owned. So yeah, you could just sit with that for a minute and what that means for how easy someone can basically forego the federal process of getting that 404 permit. And so I think what we've done as Bayou City Waterkeeper is the fight continues, and so we've gone grassroots. We've really delved into community tools for that approach that encompasses the perceptions of how communities, especially the ones living in downstream, downstream of our waterways, always continuously at risk of flooding. And yes, they are disproportionately impacted, and yes, they are our disadvantaged Black and Brown communities. So I think there's layers that have without the tools that we need from federal statutes or state or local laws, we are turning to listening and providing tools for communities. One of that is a wetland watch hub, and really what that is, it's an online platform where we're encouraging communities to report violations that they see in their, if they hear any development threats, any development scares. And we launched that last year. It's led to, a lot of local groups or organizations who are fighting for conservation, who are facing development threats. They reach out to us because we have some legal tools that they can rely on and a very fierce legal director. And so we've sent letters of support to the U.S. Army Corps, the EPA, Region 6, in order to kind of raise the alarm of a development concern that we have. And just to share a quick success story from the Wetland Watch Hub, this time last year we had a local organization called Galveston Bay Foundation. They found out there was a private family development threat to a 106-acre wetland parcel on the Taylor Bayou Forest, which was adjacent to the Taylor Bayou. And so the Sackett decision, once it happened, really it kind of killed the legal arguments we had under, qualifying it as a significant nexus test or, making sure that the Corps follows jurisdictional determination and not just, hands out that 404 permit. And so what happened was a bunch of local organizations, including ours, sent out these letters of support for Galveston Bay Foundation. And what happened is the federal government actually found out, they got involved, and thanks to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, they were able to secure a grant for that Taylor Bayou Forest. And so that parcel is no longer under threat of development, and it went into a conservation easement. And I think it's just a good example of what the America the Beautiful initiative or the 30 by 30 conservation goal looks like. It kind of just takes multiple stakeholders and multiple steps in order to achieve whether it's 106 acres or more. It helps us get to that ultimate goal of conservation.
Really appreciate hearing that. Right, the Clean Water Act is a tool. Was a stronger tool. It's been weakened, and through this grassroots movement and these efforts, you're finding other tools while we're also still building the case to restore that law to the safeguard that it was. So now, Jasmine, for you, moving to Endangered Species Act, a major area of your work is the small-tooth sawfish, federally listed endangered species. So can you talk about the role of the Endangered Species Act in that and what you've been experiencing?
Yeah. So first, let me take us on a quick journey. Younger Jasmine, she's still young. Younger Jasmine, all super excited. I'm going to go change the world. I'm going to go protect these shark and ray species. And then, finding out that the Endangered Species Act is a thing, getting really excited, starting my career researching these incredible animals, the small-toothed sawfish. They have huge cultural significance, ecological significance. I'm thinking we're all on board, right? We're all on board. This is a charismatic species. They look super cool. And I quickly learned that the love that I had for them and what I thought was some teeth in policy with the Endangered Species Act, rose-colored glasses came off very quickly. So for those of you that don't know, when a species is listed on the Endangered Species Act, a couple of things happen. One, there's supposed to be a team formed, a team made up of a diverse group of stakeholders, supposedly, that have knowledge or information about the species, and they come together and they create a recovery implementation plan to try to recover that species. And part of that plan is analyzing the threats to that species and then also designating what's called critical habitat, which are areas of biological, ecological, or geological importance to the health of that population. And critical habitat is something that, for the small-toothed sawfish, has been partially designated but not fully designated. So for our really young, small-toothed sawfish, they're in their nursery areas, which are typically mangrove shorelines. And critical habitat has been designated in a couple of places specifically the area around 10,000 Islands Wildlife Refuge, Everglades National Park area. But once sawfish grow up, once they get a certain size, they will leave their nursery areas and they move to other parts of the coast of Florida. And there was no designation for what happens to them when they leave. So it's like, okay, great. You've had a safe place to grow up, and now you're entering the cold, cruel world where apparently we don't care about you anymore. So that was something that I started working on was, okay, let's get some information about where these sawfish are going. How much time are they spending there, all of the information that we need to be able to designate critical habitat. And where I live in the Tampa Bay area, we have sawfish there as part of their migration route from May to October, consistently with regularity. There's also other places where we know they go from movement studies and tracking. We also know some of their major threats that they're facing. There's bycatch, so accidental catching in fishing gear, particularly in shrimp trawls. And then the second big one is loss of habitat. And so we have these two areas, which are designated nursery areas for the small-toothed sawfish. But we have seen that small-toothed sawfish are being pupped, being born other places as well. So in Tampa Bay a couple years ago, we had a whole litter of small-toothed sawfish that were pupped on a public beach, which is not a great place for you to be if you're a baby sawfish. There were a lot of people like picking them up, taking pictures, all of that sort of thing. And we have a huge port in Tampa, and it's a big cruise line port. They really like their deep canal or their deep channels for their cruise ships to get in. And my story kind of is also dredging. It seems to be a theme. But so we had this issue where we had there's a channel leading into Tampa Port, Egmont Channel, and they were doing their dredging, and they actually caught in their nets ahead of the dredging multiple small-toothed sawfish, and their nose, their little rostrum was broken off. They all died, and this was a big. What I thought was like, cool. This is like a no-brainer. You caught critically endangered species in your net while you were preparing to dredge. They're listed on the ESA. You've got to stop the project. I thought that was a straightforward thing. Not a straightforward thing. So because the area was not officially designated critical habitat, the legal argument was not as solid as one would hope. So it's projects like that. It's projects where we have our mangrove forests being taken out for development, which is not only a place that's really important for small-toothed sawfish, but an innumerable amount of species rely on these mangrove shorelines. And so we have this development that's happening, these mangroves being taken out, and we keep trying to make these arguments of, hey, this is really important for endangered species. And it's a battle that we're working with our local water keepers who are suing the pants off of people. Go them. But trying to figure out this balance of, yes, we want to make sure that we have a lot of information before we go designating something critical habitat because it has lots of economic implications potentially for the counties that these areas are. But also, if we keep stalling, we lose our legal footing, especially with the concerns that we have of like potentially the ESA losing some power in the future, depending on how things shake out in the next couple of years. And so we're really struggling with this. Okay, this is a really good safeguard that we have, but it's not working in the way that I thought it would work. And so trying to figure out what are those alternative solutions to protecting these areas. And the small-toothed sawfish is really good for this because it's a really easily identifiable animal. Like, you see something with a giant saw on its face, and you're like, that's a sawfish. I know that's a sawfish. I see it. It looks really cool. And so we like to leverage the small-toothed sawfish because it is easily identifiable, because there's something that you can get people around, like, oh, this animal looks so cool. Don't you want to protect it? But by protecting the small-toothed sawfish and protecting these habitats, you're also protecting everything that's relying on the mangroves as well. And so that's sort of where we're at, and sort of like the basis of myths. People are like, sharks, that's very specific. But sharks are cool. People think sharks are cool. Well, sharks are cool, but people think sharks are cool. And so in some ways, you can leverage that like superstardom of sharks to try to protect other things and elevate other things and habitats. And so that's what we're really trying to do with the small-toothed sawfish and some of the other endangered species of sharks and rays that we have in Florida. Because we actually have a lifeboat population of small-toothed sawfish. So small-toothed sawfish are found two places in the world regularly: Florida and the Bahamas. And so it's like, hello, can we get on board to protect the sawfish? They're about to like literally disappear from the face of the earth. I don't think that's more important than dredging this channel so this cruise ship can get through.
Stop the dredging. So Nilda, wanted to pose a question to you about the Endangered Species Act as well, how it's leveraged to make sure Puerto Rico's protected areas are biodiverse, and like your experience with it as well, and any story you have.
So I can relate to your stories, and it was a learning experience as well. Like she was saying at the beginning, when very young in my career, I thought I had the same impression, right? But I can tell you right now, what I have learned in the process is that every tool that you can have and help implement or to pass or get approved that might help, even though it's a little bit protecting the species or the habitats, is welcome. And you should support it, and you should support any community group that might be supporting it. Because at the very end, the fights or the battles to protect these species and the habitats are very diverse. And you never know which tools you will be able to access and help you safeguard this habitat or the species. We work with Endangered Species Act, we work with the Clean Water Act, we work with state legislations and regulations. And currently, quite often, it comes down to the state regulations more than the federal regulations. Because quite often we found those loopholes, like you were facing with those dead species, but it's the same thing. Sometimes, for example, for you to have an idea for a take on the Endangered Species Act, you need to have the dead animal, but also have the intention of going after it and killing it. So accidentally, it doesn't count. And quite often we face that. We go and evaluate impact on critical habitat, nesting beaches of sea turtles, and face the same thing. So we have, in those cases, the state regulations, and it's the whole process of the legal process of the state. Sometimes it takes forever. We would like for it to be more expedite, but it doesn't always work that way. But at the very end, if we have good results, it's good. But that doesn't mean that the Endangered Species Act doesn't help us, because there are many endangered species that are listed federally, and they have not been listed at the state level because it's another process, as always. But then if they are listed federally, they are listed at the state level. And then for some of these occasions, having a federally listed species or critical habitat, by consequences, it is adopted at the state level. And it helps us sometimes have some particular conditions on a development, or some agencies, federal agencies, might be supporting something like you were mentioning before. And because of these laws, federal agencies usually pay more attention to the federal laws than the state laws, so it supports your cause. And sometimes at the very end, you might not be able to get the mitigation or stop with the federal regulations, maybe by the state regulations, but sometimes at the very beginning, they pay attention because there are some federal laws or regulations to consider. So it's like you start, sometimes it's like if you play poker and things like that type of game. Sometimes it is something like strategies that you can use for different cases. So you need to learn very well the laws and regulations that protect your species, learn the loopholes, and start getting experience on what has worked on particular cases and what has not, and then pass forward that information. Because sometimes a lot of people that work on this and the public have that knowledge or what they think they know about these laws and regulations, and it might be misleading, you know. So you don't want people to be misled by these type of things. So knowing ahead of time, certain things will help causes, will help the communities and other biologists that might be working on the same thing. So that's I think that's my kind of my takeaway message. Any tool that is available, like the Endangered Species Act, if it supports anything that you're doing with conserve and protect the species, it is of benefit. You never know which tool you will be using.
Thank you. So for Ray, I wanted to mention it's kind of on the website for the conference too. Puerto Rico has 27% of its nearshore environment protected. Amazing, so close to the 30% goal. But can you share more about approaches to ensure this is actually effective and equitable and the spirit of beyond 30?
Yes, thank you. Just by the way, I want to highlight that we all wore similar outfits, and we're like twins. So, collective mind. I haven't even mentioned before. This is a good way to even our shoes match. So, anyway, that's how my mind works. Sorry. So, yes, back to protected areas. Puerto Rico right now is at 27%. So there's of course, when we talk about Puerto Rico's jurisdictional waters, of course, they extend out to 0 to 9 nautical miles. Then you have the federal waters, which go out to 200. Puerto Rico doesn't have jurisdiction in that. So, of course, Puerto Rico itself is part of natural resources, and the local government doesn't have authority over that, so we can't protect that area. That's feds. So, Puerto Rico, at 27% marine, on the land it's 16%. So 16% on the land, we have a bit further to go, even though it's still pretty good. One of the ways that I believe has been very effective, and it really started 2 or 3 administrations ago. At the very beginning, it was due to financial restraints. It was cooperative management agreements. It was, how can we manage these protected areas? And it was like, oh, some NGOs were saying, I can help out with that. So earlier today, in the opening session, you heard Roberto Viqueira. He's with Protectores de Cuencas. They have a co-management agreement with Guanica National Forest, or the Guanica Forest Reserve. That same type of agreement is very similar to what many others have. And so this is not unique to just Guanica. But the administration that followed the first signing of like 2 or 3 agreements came in and signed 18 agreements. And so from then it started this process, and this was about Carmen Guerrero. When was that? Maybe 10 years ago? Something like that? So like about 10 years ago, 18 agreements signed at once for co-management of protected areas between local community-based NGOs to really help out in the management of protected areas. And that meant the co-management really was fully inclusive in that those local NGOs had the right to charge for parking and to reinvest it into management of trails and just everything that it entailed. So it really not only empowered those locally based communities, but it also facilitated a lot of the local traditional knowledge of when to do the cleaning, when to do maintenance, when to do research, when to do research that really was needed. Sometimes it happens quite a bit that Puerto Rico is very well researched. There's a lot of universities, there's a lot of great scientists. And so, but sometimes the things that aren't researched go unresearched for a long time. And so this type of collaboration really helped get more folks involved from those communities. It really reached to the point that right now, recently, about 2 months ago, we had a new preserve pass of Jardines de Vega Baja with a new marine protected area that from the beginning, the concept of a co-managed area was how it was proposed. And so it's something that it really shows how not only it can be financially responsible, but also really including local communities, local NGOs that have the knowledge, that have been doing the work on the ground, really empowers them, but also makes work practical. It really allows efforts to continue into the long term. The Department of Natural Resources, since maybe 12 years ago, the funding has been cut. Continues to be cut. Staff has been cut, and so it makes management from the agency to be the solely responsible. It makes it very hard on the agency. So that beginning of identifying the need to collaborate with local organizations and communities that have the capacity to really conduct implementation is really amazing. Actually, right now we're right next to Isla Verde. We're in Isla Verde. There's a marine protected area right here, which is Arrecifes Isla Verde, run by Arrecifes Isla Verde. The co-management with them. Isla, I believe, is on their board as well. The director is Paco Lopez, and this is again one of the reserves that was really community-based, and it's one of those things that you can really see the difference because we still have protected areas in Puerto Rico that are not effective. They don't have management plans. They don't have staff, but there's also no community involvement. And so we can really see that difference between small MPAs like Arrecifes Isla Verde and Arrecifes de Guayama, where there's nobody. And it's an amazing site. It's a location that's amazing, but there's nobody there doing anything. And again, it's one of those things that the local government has recognized the need to collaborate. And so to me, that's ability to replicate, not do it just once, not making it political, that, because this party did it with 2 or 3, I'm not going to do it. He said, I'm going to do 18 the next one. And then now, the new signing is that, no, we're going to create a new one already with co-management in mind. And so it's one of those things that it didn't become political, it didn't become partisan, it just became about what is effective and financially responsible and really allowed for governance of those protected areas to really begin to be implemented effectively. And so I believe this is one of those, I think I've mentioned it before, one of those big wins in Puerto Rico that can really be a case study to really be exported and replicated and adapted elsewhere, because the way that local communities have gotten together to really do this has been very, very successful. And I know tomorrow you have another talk, but having Dulce in the crowd as well, it's one of the things that this year it was 25 years of the Canal Luis Peña in Culebra, the marine protected area. That marine protected area was originally developed with fishers. Fishers wanted that protected area. The community got involved, and it was designated. Now it's back again to having a community group, a community board that helps manage the area with a protected area manager from the Department of Resources. And so we can really see how it's not perfect, no collaboration is, but we can really see how when the agency, and this is one of those things that we can be very critical of government, and we should be, but the other side is there as well. When government does something that needs to be recognized and applauded, we should, because just like everybody likes credit, especially government, governments get criticized heavily. And so when they deserve credit, I believe we should give it to them as well. And the way that protected areas have been moving forward for the past 15 years in Puerto Rico, it's been in such a positive way that has really, really promoted proper governance, inclusion of local communities, and really the voice of folks that are immediately impacted by those protections to really be involved in the management actions as well. So I think I got your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good.
Now, Jessa, can you share about ensuring ocean protections are effective and equitable for your community?
Equity is like a really tough thing to get through to people. So I'm going to kind of use an example, right? Like, let's assume I'm a proud American. I'm from California, right? My ancestral territory is Los Angeles, and some of the neighboring areas are my ancestral lands. However, I cannot go to North Dakota or Hawaii and walk their sacred mountains and their sacred lands and do what I want with it because I'm an American. I can go anywhere I want. I can do anything I want because I'm an American, right? In my mind, it doesn't work that way. I can go to North Dakota and I can do things when I have permission. I can walk a sacred mountain if I have permission, right? That's the way my brain works. So when you talk about equity, it's not fair, right? Because equity kind of talks about being fair, right? It's not fair that the Tongva Nation can't safely paddle their canoes from their mainland to their islands because there's DDT spill right in between that, right? So when we're talking about equity, I know a lot of people before me used to say things like, we want to be at the table. We want a seat at the table. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. In discussing equity, I think that all of the policymakers, all of the governmental agencies, all the leaders need to actually come and sit in our circle and learn what is sacred in our lands and learn how we do things in our homelands. And if that was happening, we wouldn't have a concreted Los Angeles River. Our Paimepa Height would actually be seen as sacred the way that we've seen it. We would actually have salmon in our river the way that they were supposed to be there. We'd have our trout there. We'd be safely, swimming and channeling through those waters. So it's really hard to have equity moving forward when so much destruction has happened previously, when we have been saying, excuse me, sir, you shouldn't do that, and here's why, and they say, sit down and shut up. No, come into our circle and learn why you shouldn't do that and understand that you are in my homeland, right? So equity is a tough one, but it's going to have to be moving forward in that way, is let us take the lead and, no more development, just put wind and solar and everything on our lands because you bought a piece of property. It should never have worked that way in the beginning.
So this is where I get up, and I'm going to run around, and because we have so many stories and insights from this crowd too, and so I want to open up for questions at this point. Please, and also you can ask questions of each other. Do we have any questions? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Astrid Caldas. I'm a climate scientist with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I represent my organization as the only person who is actually interested in conservation and biodiversity. So, yay for me to be here, and I'm learning a lot from you all. I have a question about the co-management 18 agreements that you mentioned. Who owned the land to start with, and how did the agreements with the community-based nonprofits started? I mean, I'm interested in the process. How did that come to be, and who owned the land to start with? Thanks.
I think, so this is the good thing. I also have Nilda here, so she works at DNR, so she can back me up if I get something wrong or if I miss something. So I'm good. But the land, most of the places were already protected areas that the Department of Natural Resources owned and managed. So, for example, I mentioned Guanica for one. That's a biosphere reserve. It's a state forest that's been, I think, designated since let me see. If I might, like more than 30 years ago. So it's a state forest already. So most of those have already been the land was already owned. So the local government had already purchased them. So let's say new reserves, or like the one right here on the marine side, nobody owns the water. So the Puerto Rico Constitution doesn't allow there to be private beaches or private ocean. And so that's still public. But it's a part of the reserve, so that's where a lot of the management actions and the management plans designate what can occur there and who has authority. And so a lot of the times, it's still, for example, for enforcement of laws, the co-managers don't have that authority because they're not law enforcement, so they don't have the authority to enforce the regulations. But they can. But then again, Nilda's a biologist with the Department of Natural Resources. She doesn't have the authority to enforce regulations because she's not law enforcement either. So it's one of those things that it gives a lot of inclusion, but there's still things that again, rule of law has to happen. But on specific land areas, there are other sites throughout Puerto Rico. From what I recall, there hasn't been any newly proposed protected areas that have been purchased to become co-management agreements on land, but on water there has been, and so there's another one. So that's usually how it is. If there are, for example, that's on the co-management agreements with the government. There are Fideicomiso de Conservación para Naturaleza. They own a private land trust. It's an NGO. There are private protected areas. Vieques as well. Fideicomiso de Conservación de Vieques has protected areas as well. Some of them are under their ownership. Puerto Rico has a lot of different ways and mechanisms to protect areas. Auxiliary forests, where private landowners designate certain areas for conservation. They have some benefit there as well, and they remain private, even though they pledge them to not be to be protected. So there's many mechanisms, but the specific agreements that I was mentioning, those 18 that I mentioned was one specific Secretary of Natural Resources that signed 18 at once to be co-managed, and those were existing protected areas that had folks interested that wanted to work with them already.
So I just wanted to add something. Sometimes we have already collaborators that have helped us manage a protected area. So it makes sense to make an agreement with them, and they will support with staff or machinery or just time, or it will be the fastest way to implement some of the conservation measures stipulated for that particular area. But like he was saying before, the greatest strength is when you have a community backing up or even pushing forward the designation of a reserve, like Jardines Vega Baja and Arrecifes Isla Verde, the one that is right here. Because in those cases, those managed or protected areas were finally designated just because that community kept going, either publicly or to the agencies and knocking on doors and with some support. But then sometimes it takes more than that, right? Because there are different interests. Sorry, there are different interests playing, and they will hold the designation. So once that finally gets designated, we are able to do an agreement with that community, and they will be the ones probably saying, this is what is needed, because they are the ones that know that area extremely well. And then they will probably just have the support for those other activities that might enter into conflict in terms of use, because of course there's always people that were not in favor of that because they want to do other things that are not for conservation, that kind of things. But sometimes it's just that. It's that the community is the one that started the idea of the designation. Then the agency gets in and say, okay, let's look more in detail this area. And then you have the support of the data, the biologists, and then we start looking for those different processes, like Raimundo was saying, that we have to designate an area. And then finally, once it's designated, then the natural thing to do is an agreement for supporting that management. And of course, it will help a lot if you have that community support, because we don't have rangers to go for every people, so having that community support just helps a lot.
Thank you. I have two questions queued up, and Angela, third? Okay. I was like, two here, and then if there's another one, or also there's happy hour. Yeah, there's happy hour at 5:30. You are all welcome to continue conversation here, but we have.
Hello, thank you everybody. My name is Ayana Melwan. I work for Aquarium Conservation Partnership, and there's a lot that we do, but we're co-conspirators that are aquariums, zoos with aquariums, and our first sustainable business corporation partner that just got brought on this year across the United States and including in Canada. And we've been doing a lot of work in partnership with no other agency on centering community voices that are from diverse perspectives and cross-sector partners around conservation and, in particular, relationships with nature, et cetera, et cetera. So without going into too much detail, you had mentioned that you want to have a place-based strategy in terms of folks coming to you to come into the circle, and I'm curious, what does that invitation look like? Because some of the community that we're working with across the United States does not want the government, and we've been working for the past 6 months on trying to be the liaison between the relationships with the cross-sector partners in the community and the federal government on where there can be a happy medium. And so I love what you said. I'm all about place-based strategies, and I'm curious, what does that invitation look like to you and others on the panel?
I know that's a tough place to be in, but ultimately, when the indigenous peoples are saying what they want on their lands, that has to be law, right? Like, all these laws that were created to separate us from our lands, those were never here before. Those are somebody else's law. So what the natives are saying has to be law. And the best advice that I can give you is to continue growing your relationship, your personal relationship with these indigenous peoples, to understand how their minds work, how their hearts work, and how this land is sacred for them, and how because the thing what people don't understand when they come to our homeland is that we were given law too. And those come in creation stories and so many different stories of how we're tied to the land, but how we're supposed to care for the land. So other people coming in and telling us how we're supposed to do things, it's a slap in the face of our Creator. So I would just recommend and suggest that you make those relationships to understand why they feel so strongly about this or that, and why they feel that it has to be this way or that way. Because ultimately, their creation stories are more law, in my humble opinion, than any government agency and their law. Does that make sense?
It does, and I have the relationships. Let me reframe. So in order for outside individuals that have come in and said, this is the law, this is what we're going to do, or they enact and implement the law, and we're asking them to come to the table instead of us going to the decision-making table, what does that invitation look like? Because to your point, we can't just have somebody come in and repeat the trauma of implementing the laws that were created that go against belief systems and traditions. So what does the invitation look like to have those folks that are implementing the American laws that everybody has to follow to the tables instead of us going to their table.
Well,
The circle. Thank you.
I mean, the best circles are held with food. The best conversations are held with food. So maybe having a gathering where folks get to share traditional cultural food from the area, like for us in California, it would be the acorn. So it would take a whole year to plan that process. Why? Because it takes a whole year after gathering the acorns to do anything with it, right? But then we can have this beautiful spread using acorn and traditional foods and having these folks come and sit with us, And as Indigenous peoples, we don't mind, sharing that space to have people come and eat with us. But we're so scared. I'm going to just point at myself and from my understanding. I'm so scared because we have been lied to generation after generation after generation after generation. And then when we've watched our elders go and say, this is why we're begging you to protect this site, this is what it means to us, then these invaders come in the dead of the night and start digging things up on purpose. So we are so scared to let people in. And I'm asking you to see it from that perspective too. But in trying to merge these entities to have these discussions, they have to be, these government agencies and other folks have to be willing to just give some time and to listen. And I know policy and all of this is always like moved like this. Our people never moved like that. And I understand that with the climate injustices that everybody feels like we have to rush, at the end of the day, we still have to build that trust, and it doesn't get built in a day.
Happy hours in 15 minutes. I have a question for anybody but Jasmine or Jewel, because I talked to you about this. So the name of your panel is Beyond 30, and if you look behind you, there's a sign that says 5 years to 30 by 30. And Raimundo, you're really, I think I've heard like 25 people speak today, and you're kind of the only person I've heard hint at we need to get to 30%. And you mentioned it for Puerto Rican land. I'm actually not hearing a lot of people saying like they support 30% or we want to get to 30% at this conference, which is sort of like the great irony of the America the Beautiful Coalition, which is about 30 by 30 and about justice for you. I feel like we haven't come out and said it yet, but I do think that this coalition wants to change the way we talk about it. And no one's really coming. I'm doing it now. But we haven't had that come to Jesus moment where we say we're smashing the table and we're creating our own. And so the slogan right now is 5 years to 30 by 30. But I wonder if you just have any ideas of what that slogan is going to be in 2031. Like what is the next thing?
Well, if I can just say, as an Indigenous woman, again, I can't speak for all Indigenous peoples, we need to be beyond that 30-30. If we could do 100%, that's what it should be, right? But ultimately, one of the things that SPI pushes for is land back, water back. Because the only way to protect these areas, is by listening to the traditional peoples. And at that point, it goes beyond. That table's gone. Forget that table. It's that sacred circle. And so, in my humble opinion, it's about giving a bigger percentage of that land and waters back to the peoples so that then they can start actually doing the work that has been, missing for all this time. Like, one of the things that we've been fighting for is for our sacred fire. And we hear people losing their homes, people losing their lives because of these quote-unquote wildfires. And if you go way back before colonization, when the Spaniards first got into our homelands, they were saying it looked like a beautiful untouched paradise. It was perfectly manicured. How could it be perfectly manicured and untouched? I'll tell you what was happening is that our people were caring for that land from the gate. So, in my opinion, it's all about the land back movement. And I don't want to wait for 30, to let that happen. It needs to happen today.
Angela, that's a good question. I think local context is really important when we talk about conservation. I think there are communities out there who are battling with compounding effects of climate injustices, and it's hard to talk about a goal for conservation when I think there are other sort of nexus points of failed government intervention or a lack of effective community engagement that really actually tries to understand perceptions and the buy-in of what these community folks really need, especially the ones who are at most risk of natural disaster or other climate impacts. I would love to see it go year by year. I'd love to, for it to be 31 by 31, 32 by 32. It's very ideal, but I think there's lots of local sort of context and environmental justice sort of cross sections that have to be discussed and be implemented in the conversation, because conservation will look different in all regions, based on those varying factors.
I think like Texas doesn't have a 30 by 30 for their state. Right.
There you go.
So, if you allow me, so I think it's achievable, and I think we might even be able to exceed it. Why do I say that? Am I too optimistic? When I started working with coral nurseries and corals, I need to discuss and argue and justify why coral nurseries were important and that we can actually do coral restoration, and there was no funding for it because it was a crazy idea. And now it's just part of programs. It's required. The same thing with the urchins. We are growing urchins because we acknowledge they are a key species in corals. And before it was a pilot crazy project. And I think a lot has changed, not just the agencies, but the funding allocations, the community involvement, the communication. So I think we have changed a lot. If we look past, we have changed a lot in the past few years. Before having all this overwhelming amount of information was very strange. Now you can know in just 1 second what is going around the world, and people will get their message through and will get backup for it. So I think because of those things have changed, how people is understanding from the very basic, from the people that is in this field or not, they understand the importance of things, of conservation of the species, and they get involved. And how that has affected the decisions of the agencies, federal or state, and how it has changed the vision of the community and the community involvement. So I think because of that, we have a chance.
Joe, I can take some of Angela's happy hour time. I'll treat you. So, on that, I mean, I feel that yes, I think it's we haven't talked about it enough. So I have two thoughts about this, because I was part of 20 by 20. So when that was a while ago. And I remember in 2018 and 20 by 20, we're going to do 20, and Puerto Rico was already at that time was like 24%. So we're like, we're good. And I was like, we're good, so we're done, right? We're done. So when like 30, I was like, wait a minute, now 30? So we were done. It's one of those things that comes back to the question about effective management, and then really coming back to what that means. So let me just toss a little something that's very different. In Puerto Rico, originally there were it was estimated that about 30 to 40,000 Taínos lived in Puerto Rico. Most women, men, and children, most of them were fishers. And yet with 30 to 40,000 people, all of them fishing, near-shore conch weren't fished out. Right now that we have 1,200 fishermen, commercial fishers in Puerto Rico, and we're very close to overfishing a lot of that resource. And so it's one of those things that we can see how can we really look at how things have been done. Just because something is protected or something is delimited or designated doesn't mean it's actually protected. So there's again a lot of science that old white guys, Ray Hilburn, and saying like how we've in the past 20 years we've increased by like 1,000% protected areas, but we still need a lot more protection, right? So and then talking back about how back when indigenous folks had governance over their lands, folks came and they're like, oh, it was pristine. It wasn't pristine. It was well managed. Management had been part of our cultures throughout Abdayala, the Americas, throughout Africa and Asia as well, even in Europe as well. So I think it's one of these things that really, I think there's a lot of optimism just because their sustainability has been achieved. We can achieve it. We just really need to make sure that we are purposeful about it, that we don't just take the win because the paper was signed, but now we need to see about having it being implemented and seeing how that occurs really goes back to the inclusion of it. And I think that's where we've consistently failed, because when in the 80s and 90s when paper parks became a good term, and then the failure because there was paper parks. It was because of the inclusion aspect. We were tracking the signatures, but not the actual implementation of management, and that's where communities and place-based comes into place, and that's where we failed with, and that's how paper parks came in, because the inclusion aspect of it wasn't really there. And I think this is where we're really heading towards making sure, because again, conference like this, I mean, most of us have been the sole folks that we look like we do through college and through graduate work and then through first jobs, looking around the room and saying, why am I the only immigrant? Why am I the only brown person? Why nobody else have a beard? Why do I look like this and nobody else around me looks like this? And so, right? Why does everybody, this type of situation. So this type of coalition and this type of conference that has folks like us and like you in the crowd and folks next door leading these conversations, I feel that it is very much so a turning point, because we're not going to go back to not be we're not going back to being the only ones in the room anymore, and we're not going back to just that saying, can I please have a seat at the table? Like I want the table, I want to lead that table because I have the information. We have the capacity, and so you don't want a seat at the table. I don't want you to hear my voice. We want to work together.
Yeah. So the last note is we do have a coalition with work groups. There's an ocean work group. There's a wildlife work group. So this is an invitation for that. And then also, as the conference keeps going, there's happy hour on the terrace. I think a few doors down, 5:30 soon. Just go over there. There's also community dinner opportunities for the conversations to continue tomorrow. The conference agenda is also a lot of discussion and really diving more into what we want to see in next year as for the policy priorities. And so there's a lot of discussion moving forward, and I'm excited to be in those spaces with all of you. And then one tangible thing is I put it in the little Huva chat, like for this session too, that there's a biodiversity workshop survey that the wildlife work group is running. So I invite you all to take a look at that survey and put some input there. And if you can't find it in the Huva app, you can ask me or Karina over here. So those tangible things. And also thank you to our panelists. Another round there, and then we'll wrap it up.
Just a quick announcement about the People of Color Caucus Happy Hour. It is right over here. There are limited number of drinks. I'm not sure if they have tickets or if they're just going to count the drinks as we order them, but there are limited. And then after we run out, you're going to have to pay cash. But dinner at 7 has open bar. So make some drinks available at happy hour. All the drinks available at dinner. And dinner starts at 7.
You're not on Angela's social WhatsApp. You should.
Yeah.